All right, guys. So, welcome to Chapter 1, the Introduction for Computer Forensics. Remember, this is a guide that we're going to be following through the Digital Investigator's Handbook. So, if you don't have this book yet, this is the book that we are going to be following as we go through this course. Now, this is going to be a practical guide to the EHFI exam. So, think of this course as your entry point to the front lines of, well, any digital investigation. Every day, data is stolen and identities are compromised. Now, it's going to be our job to find the story hidden behind the ones and the zeros. So, at its core, digital forensics is a science of finding, preserving, and analyzing data on digital devices to uncover facts about an incident. Now, we got to think about a couple different things here. The first thing is going to be the digital autopsy. We need to think about performing an autopsy on a device. Just like a person in the morgue does to a murder, we do the same thing with devices. Because the goal here is we're going to act as detectives to determine three things: what happened, how did it happen, and who is responsible. Now, to understand our role, I like to use the castle analogy. Cybersecurity in the proactive stage, there are going to be things like castle guards. Their jobs are to build the walls, the firewalls, patrolling, monitoring, and set alarms to prevent an attack. Now, any of you who have taken my defense course know exactly what I mean by this because I use the same analogy in that course. They're there to build the walls. They're the blue team. They're there to protect things. Now, unfortunately, as digital forensics, we are more reactive. We're the detectives. We're called after the alarm goes off. We're to investigate the breach to see how the intruder got in and what data they stole. And unfortunately, we are there after the firefighters are done with the scene. So we have to pick up the pieces, know what was contaminated, what's not contaminated, and prove guilt or innocence upon a party. Now we've got four critical questions here, and we must answer these on any digital forensics investigations. The first one's going to be who? Who attacked us? Now, we need to make sure that we know that we're bringing someone to justice, right? And so we need to figure out, well, who are we trying to investigate? What did they take? What did they modify or damage? When did the breach occur? We must establish a clear timeline and make sure it hasn't been tampered with. And then, how did they bypass our defenses to begin with? This will help us identify the entry point of the incident itself. Now, known as the Wild West, the 1970s and 80s, everything was focused on mainframes. They were used by governments and large organizations. Now, the crimes here mostly were financial fraud and insider threats. And so, us as detectives, we didn't really have any specialized tools. Investigations were handled by curious admins and auditors to figure out what happened to their own systems. Now, in 1986, this is a huge milestone, is when the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was officially made into a statute, a law, which made hacking an actual crime. And many times it's a federal crime. Okay. And so as we move through the history itself, like the 1990s, this is when the tech explosion happened. This is where the dot-com era became a thing. This has occurred where the rise of affordable PCs and the public internet. Cybercrime itself moved from simple fraud to viruses and hacking. And so we know this from previous history, like you've taken my Security Plus class or anything like that. We know about the I Love You virus and different things that happened in the 1990s and so on that were really the big start of everything, to include the Morris worm, right? Now, the science behind it, this is where forensics became a formal science, okay? Specialized tools like Encase and FTKs started coming up because we needed tools to fight this. And we needed procedures to develop that if we did get to a crime scene, we wanted to make sure that we didn't, we wanted to ensure that evidence integrity was held to the highest standard because we don't want to manipulate any data. We were there to figure out what happened, not to plant evidence. So as we moved forward into the 2000s to the present, this is the modern explosion of technology because now we've got things like mobile data devices, smartphones, they're gold mines for like GPSs, messages, and app history, right? They're just they're in everybody's pockets everywhere. Now, we have been moving to the cloud, especially since the COVID era. We've been moving to the cloud, where all the evidence itself is probably going to live on servers that are not local to a server farm on your corporate environment anymore. They're not on premise anymore. They're going to be in GCP, they're going to be in AWS or Azure. They're not going to be on the suspect's physical device themselves. And then nowadays, everything is an IoT device, right? We call it Internet of Threats, Internet of Things. These are things that we have to think about as we're going through this. Smart speakers and cameras are now our digital witnesses. If for some reason a motion sensor saw that I came through, or that the front door lock logged that a user unlocked that lock at a certain time, it could be used as evidence or even alibis for a witness. Now, there's going to be two distinct fields with different priorities. We have incident response and digital forensics. Remember, incident response, we're talking about CompTIA as a plus here, right? We're talking about different class completely. These are the firefighters. Their goal is containment and recovery. They act fast to stop attacks and get the systems back online. Us as digital forensics, though, we're the fire investigators. We come in after the fire has been put out. Our goal is going to be evidence and attribution. Okay, we want to make sure that we can work slowly and methodically and preserve the data. We're not there to muddy up the waters even more. We're there to pick up the pieces and build a proper story. Because remember, on an incident response goals themselves, their mindset is put out the fire immediately, even if it means altering the scene. They're stopping the bleeding. Remember, we use that term quite a bit. Every second counts. They need to stop the bleed, save the business, move on. Now, the digital forensics goal, on the other hand, we do no harm to the data itself. Integrity is everything. We create perfect copies of drives, and we follow a strict custody, chain of custody. Thank you. So that the findings can be held up in court, because we want it to be admissible in court. Unfortunately, if we don't have proper chain of custody and we can't prove that the data hasn't been tampered with, then it won't hold up in court itself and it won't be admissible. Whoops. So finding that smoking gun is useless if the evidence is thrown out in court. We want to make sure that the legal rules are just as important as our technical skills. And so we need to know a lot of different concepts in the legal concepts and make sure that we follow them perfectly, because we are a member of the law enforcement at this point. We want to make sure that we're following the statutes, we're following the law, so that way our case does not get thrown out because we messed up. So the first one I want to talk about is search warrants. So this is the legal permission slip. You cannot search a digital device without authority. A warrant requires a couple different pieces. For one, you need probable cause. You need solid facts, not just a hunch, that the crime was committed. And then that warrant has to be very specific. It needs to describe exactly what is allowed to search. Like, for instance, the suspect's iPhone or their any digital device within a premise, okay? Because if it's not listed on the warrant itself for the search warrant, then we're not allowed to go fishing. So the search warrant itself is going to tell us what we're allowed to seize. And this is the big thing I like to say: no fishing expeditions. Basically, we're not allowed to go outside the search warrant. We can't get a search warrant to grab their cell phone and then notice they also have a laptop and try to grab the laptop. The search warrant needs to be completely specific, and that's why they're pretty vague. Most search warrants nowadays are going to tell you, hey, this search warrant is valid for the premises or the property of, and give an address on the property, and say everything within the property is a valid search. And this is how they get around some of this. But for instance, if you got pulled over on the side of the road because you had a broken tail light and they didn't have a search warrant to search your car, you can say, no, I do not consent to a search, and they would have to go get a warrant to search your car. Now, with that said, once they have the search warrant may say any device within the car itself. But what if the cell phone was in the suspect's pocket? Well, because it wasn't included in that search warrant, it wouldn't be admissible in the court of law. So these are things that we have to be very careful of when we're dealing with digital integrity, as well as anything. Just like a cop would, they may do something that's not legal, but once it makes it to the court, then it can get thrown out. The evidence can get thrown out because it wasn't obtained in a legal fashion. So let's talk about chain of custodies again. This is the 5 W's, okay? To maintain the chain, you must document the 5 W's. Who handled the evidence? Every person who handles evidence must sign so we understand who handled the evidence. Detailed description, including serial numbers of what the evidence is. Precise dates and times of when it was obtained. Where is it stored? Evidence locker, evidence, where is it stored, right? And it's going to be in a secure location, not just the trunk of the cop's car. And then why? What is the reasoning for handling? So sometimes we need to pull a hard drive out of a computer. So as digital and forensics investigators, we're going to go get the chain of custody. The evidence might have been captured and it's sitting in the evidence locker right now. We may have to go check out that evidence. So when we check out the evidence, we're going to have to fill out a whole nother 5 W's. The who, what, when, where, why, right? The reason for us pulling it out is we're going to image the drive to make a forensics image. So that way we can then start searching through the data to build the case. Now, with that said, there's a whole bunch of other things we're going to talk about this. This is going to get deeper as we go. But for chapter 1, just know that the chain of custody is anytime evidence is obtained, it's going to have the chain of everywhere there is, everywhere the evidence has been. And just know that if there is a single gap in the log, the evidence might be inadmissible, which then it's just thrown out. You're just not allowed to use that evidence in this court case because it's going to create reasonable doubt for the suspect itself, which may let them off the hook. Okay. Now, admissibility of evidence itself. For evidence to be accepted by a judge, it must pass the admissibility test. For one, it must be relevant. It must relate to the case itself. There has to be the facts of the case itself. Just because something that happened in another time can't be pulled into the case unless it was relevant to the case itself. It needs to be proven to be real, the real deal. And this is where we're going to bring in the chain of custody. It needs to be authentic. This is their computer from their premises. This is when we obtained it. Here's pictures of where it was. We need to prove that that computer was authentic and wasn't planted on the scene of the crime. We need to legally prove that we've obtained it with a warrant or consent, because without a warrant, we'll have to get consent from the suspect. Like, do you consent that I search your car? No, I don't. I do not consent. So please go get a warrant. And then there's the fruit of the poisonous tree, okay? If evidence is obtained illegally, it and anything found because of it is now inadmissible. So if you gathered a piece of evidence that led you to another piece of evidence that led you to another piece of evidence, all of that evidence would be thrown out because it was obtained illegally. All right. With the power to unlock secrets comes the responsibility to protect them. Your ethics are what makes evidence trustworthy. So you have to have a trustworthy backstory for yourself. You are the SHME. You're the seeker of truth. So, principle 1 for your ethical guidelines: objectivity. You are the seeker of truth and a neutral finder of facts. You need to fight any confirmation bias. You're not going to look for evidence and prove your theory. You're going to follow all the leads, and the leads are what's going to prove the story. You need to have some neutrality. So set personal feelings aside and report only what the data shows. And this is pretty hard to do, especially if you have, some backstory with the client, or you have something that could, I don't know, maybe you lost your a family member due to some homicide, or um, you know somebody who went through um, sexual abuse or anything like that, and this person has now been arrested for child pornography or something in that nature. Now, some of these topics, they're very unsettling, but we have to make sure that we are a seeker of truth and we're not making up any story. We're not going to try to um, go through that. All right. Now, principle 2 is going to be confidentiality. We will see private photos, emails, secrets, and we have to protect this data. We only are going to discuss what we find with authorized personnel, and we're only going to make sure that all the evidence that we do have is going to be in a secure locker and encrypted. We're going to make sure that nobody can get access to this unless they are need to know, and it's secured properly. Principles 3s and 4s is going to be competence and legal compliance. So our competence needs to be up to par because technology evolves. We're going to be the experts. So we need to have a duty to keep our skills sharp. And if we don't know something, we're going to go ask a specialist. We're not going to guess ourselves because we're not the specialist. We may need to bring in other specialists in order to improve this. And then the other thing is going to be legal compliance. We need to stay in scope of our warrant. Just taking a quick look without authority is illegal, and that search can destroy the entire case. So we need to stay within our compliance. And so one of the things about documentation here is this field requires a lot of documentation. If it was not written down, it didn't happen. Your notes must be detailed enough for another expert to replicate your work. You need to write chronologically, in time fashion, and in first person. Like, I did this is how I did it, these are the tools I ran, this is the process I used. We're going to want to document every tool, every command, and every error. We're going to try to avoid lingo, right, and jargon. We don't want to be very technical here. We want to be non-technical with the way that we write, but we want to have it backed up with technical expertise. Okay, we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can do to avoid like uninformed opinions. We're not going to be opinionated in these records. It's only going to state factual. So let's talk about the methodology that we use for this course. So we have to look at the investigation process. For those that are going to be taking the CHFI for this course, just know that this is highly tested upon about knowing the investigation process, because they're going to give you a lot of hypothetical and scenario-based setups. And it's going to follow these 5 steps. The 5 steps are going to be prep. We're going to say, do we have authorization? What's our warrant? What are the tools are we going to use? Once we have all of that, we're going to start collecting. We're going to preserve an image and go through all of this. And we'll talk about this in future chapters of how we're going to go about all of this. We're going to then analyze the artifacts that we create, because we're not going to use the original evidence. We're going to create artifacts and that are digitally sound forensics investigative techniques, and then we're going to analyze them. Now, through that analyzation, we're going to then build a report. We're going to tell the story, and we're only going to tell the story of what we can find. We can tell them exactly, we can tell you that this person sent this email at this time at this computer. Here's the copy of the email. Here's a response from the other email. Here's how I know it's authentic and not fake, by looking at DMARC and SPF and other email techniques. And then at the last thing is this is part of our job as forensic investigators, is now we get to present a testimony. We're going to go to court. We're going to be up on the stands under oath and present what we found. Okay, that is part of the digital forensics investigator's job. Now, step 1, get your game plan. This is going to obtain warrants, assemble the toolkit, write blockers, wipe drives, whatever we're going to do, prepare all of our chain of custody forms, and that's just phase one. Because then we're going to secure the crime scene itself. We're going to use write blockers to prevent data alteration, create bit-by-bit forensic copies, hash everything to prove that it hasn't been changed mathematically, and then go on to phase two. Phase two is all about the analysis. This is the lab work, okay? We're going to recover all those deleted files, build timelines, connect the dots, because we're going to take all that information we find in analysis and report it. We're going to translate the technical data into clear, unbiased story for non-technical people so that we can present it by defending our findings in court, because our integrity is our greatest asset. Now, that's going to help us build the foundation, okay? So technology changes, but principles of integrity, objectivity, and methodology remain constant. We're going to go through this as a digital forensics mindset, and we're going to begin our journey starting in the next chapter, in chapter 2. So I'll see you there.